to us. Get a look at this content description that lists a whole lot of organisations that are involved in human rights in the Australian context. And the challenge is going through all of these and understanding them. We start with a number of statutory bodies. So they're bodies that are created by an act of Parliament. The Australian Human Rights Commission, we've probably come across those before. That's the overarching body that looks to protect human rights in Australia. Queensland's got a similar body, and the Law Reform Commissions, which are around improving laws, making laws better in a lot of ways, including to be consistent with human rights. Let's have a little look at the Australian Human Rights Commission. Statutory body set up by an act of Parliament, and it can investigate complaints, so it has that complaint process and try and conciliate those. It conducts inquiries and research, it promotes education and awareness around human rights, and it advises government on human rights. So a number of important roles. Now we come to the Law Reform Commissions, both Australian and Queensland, and they're both very similar. These are also set up by an act of Parliament, and they're looking at the laws to say, how can we improve the laws? How can we make them simpler, easier access, but also make sure they're consistent with human rights? So they recommend legal reforms, and part of that is to uphold human rights. Federally, it's referred by the Attorney General. They can publish reports, might focus on privacy as an area of developing area of interest around human rights. What right have we got to privacy ourselves? Elder abuse has been a more recent focus. Similarly, we've got state and territory law reform bodies. So the Queensland Law Reform Commission is the body here, review, modernise Queensland law and to ensure human rights are enjoyed by Australian and Queensland citizens. Now we come to some of these other different groups. So the Queensland Council for Civil Liberties, set up in the 1960s, and they're a group that look to defend civil liberties for Queenslanders. They promote human rights, they promote the freedoms that people should have with human rights, they campaign for law reform. So an area of interest around them has been around protests. We have a history in Queensland of some fairly big protests. They provide neutral observers. Now, neutral observers are very important to protests because it's someone who can report back on exactly what is happening. Are the police acting in a responsible and reasonable manner? Are there counter-protesters who are acting in a reasonable, responsible manner? What's actually happened? And engages in public education and lobbying, trying to influence government and members towards human rights issues. Then you've got the Australian Human Rights Law Centre, which is associated with the University of New South Wales. And like an association with the university, they're focused on teaching and also research around human rights. They're promoting public awareness, teaching and training, and engaging with governments around policy. A professional body is the Australian Lawyers for Human Rights. They're looking at their group of legal professionals with an interest in human rights. So they want us to promote legal practice of human rights in Australia. They'll make some submissions to government inquiries, advocate for reforms, seeing what can be changed, for example, raising the age of criminal responsibility, and also taking things to the United Nations where Australia is not consistent with human rights obligations. Now we've got a bunch of special interest groups. Amnesty International, so they're a non-government organisation, so these are completely separate from government. More than 7 million members, funded by the members, and it's campaigns against human rights abuse. For example, Indigenous justice, refugee rights. Often they'll have petitions or protests and will conduct research and publish reports. So that's how they influence human rights. Church groups, including the World Council of Churches, again, a large organisation. They might lobby for human rights issues that are of importance to them. They also are known for providing aid in developed and developing countries and in times of crisis. International Federation of the Red Cross, another organisation that's come out of wartime efforts, founded after World War I, provides disaster relief and health services, supports community in developing countries, and advocates for protecting vulnerable populations, particularly vulnerable populations if you're going through disaster, war and those things. In Australia, Red Cross is associated with the blood banks here. And two last groups, we have the media. They have their role in human rights. So the important role that they have is that they're shining a light on issues. There's a human rights issue, maybe there's a really big protest. Media might do some investigation into what's happening, what is the issue, and talk about it and bring attention to that. And can allow people to have a voice. The courts themselves, they enforce and interpret laws. that will protect human rights. So there's a series of federal legislation that deals with discrimination on the basis of age, sex, race, or disability. And so those courts will help interpret that law and protect those rights. Finally, one last thing when there's so many things to remember is to try and remember what each group does. Australian Human Rights Commission, they're overarching. They'll deal with complaints. They'll deal with education. They're a statutory body set up by the federal government. Australian Law Reform and Queensland Law Reform Commissions. Law Reform Commissions are dealing with, they want to get better laws. So naturally we want laws consistent with human rights. Queensland Council for Civil Liberties, a volunteer group set up in Queensland, campaign for law reform, but also very interested in protests, observing at protests, making things fair there. Australian Human Rights Centre, associated with University of New South Wales, teaching and research is a focus there. Australian Lawyers for Human Rights, that's around professional practice. The courts, they're going to be involved in interpreting the law, making sure that the statutes that provide for human rights are being upheld, and the media, they provide information to the public, possibly about human right breaches.